Welcome to the Goat Rodeo, a podcast discussion about goings-on at the crossroads of technology, national security, venture capital, and geopolitics. I'm Garrett Smith, your host, and I'm joined by my regular co-hosts and fellow military veterans Dave Cottle and Simon Kuhn. We all work together at Reveal, and we like to drive discussions toward considerations for early-stage defense technology teams, investors, and policymakers. So let's get into it. Simon, you were going to bring something up about internet culture. Go for it.
All right, listen. Two incredibly stupid things happened this week on X, the Everything app.
No. Three stupid things happened on X? No.
Possibly three. Maybe even innumerable number of stupid things that we couldn't keep track of. Right. But two that are so huge that I can't even wrap my mind around how stupid people have become. The first, a Twitter account run by an anonymous person who had the word Bloomberg in his name said that Trump was pausing all tariffs, and it caused the stock market to rally 1,500 points and then crash again when they realized it was just a fake Twitter account of some random guy. This was like you can look this up. Financial Times reported it. Everybody's reported it now.
It's amazing.
Because these gullible fools.
What announcement can we make right now to make sure my 401k starts back in the right direction? No. What's the announcement? What are we going to...
Well, we could. A funny one would have been that the Taliban has given a base back to America, but that's something else that someone already did, which just didn't happen.
Yeah.
Unlike even our community snapped it up and retweeted it everywhere, and it was like, why would in a million years the Taliban give a base away?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I commented on that somewhere, and I was like, interesting, I need to look into this or something. And because it would have been interesting. You know what? Like, I could even understand. This is why like conspiracy theory weirdness catches on. It's because
we have skepticism for the Earth being round, but we're like, but maybe the Taliban's a friend now.
Yeah. What? Yeah. Well, if not a friend, you could maybe see the U.S. trying to get like strategic, facilities in the ring around China. I don't know, something, right?
Totally. But are we the most incompetent country on earth where we're like, we can't figure out how to get a plane into Afghanistan without the people of Twitter knowing? We can. We do it all the time.
It would be shocking.
God.
What happened to the stock markets after that announcement went out?
Yeah, I don't know what effect the fake Bagram bases had on the stock market.
You said three things. Those two things are...
I meant to say two. It was two.
Oh, well, there are at least two things, maybe even three.
I'm so mad that I lost count. I just can't tolerate it anymore.
It's surprising to me that you're actually on X. I kind of avoid it, honestly.
Oh, I'm not. Oh. That's the problem, is they became real news headlines. And therefore, crossed into my sphere of influence. And now I have to go look for a thing on X, and I don't have an account, and so it's annoying to click on it. You know, all that stuff.
Yeah, maybe as that was bouncing around all day yesterday, if you trace those stories back to the source, it just started with somebody, hobbyist flight tracker tracking C-17s, or a political statement, some expressed interest at some point in reclaiming Bagram, given its strategic proximity to things we care about, and really mostly reports about the Taliban saying absolutely not, this is all made up.
The craziest. It's preposterous.
The other thing I think is kind of weird about it is that the version of that story that I saw that filtered through all kinds of different places, it had an image of like inside an air traffic control tower or something, and I was like, oh, this is maybe something that's real. I don't know. I have no idea.
The Taliban's Bagram air traffic control tower press corps just firing off insider shots.
Do you think Taliban air traffic controllers have the same rates of depression that American air traffic controllers do?
No, because I don't think they have the same regulatory burden. They're just up there winging. I bet those dudes love their job. They just gotta do whatever, flip some switches, talk to some guys in some planes. Maybe I don't know how many planes are actually going to Bagram.
Yeah.
Clearly few enough that if even a single C-17 flies overhead, heaven forbid, we've taken the country back.
Yeah. Well, women, I'm sure, aren't allowed up there in that air traffic control tower. Okay, so let's get into a bit of the news roll up for the week. There was a Crunchbase article. I'm just going to start here because I think it's relevant to a few different slices of our listener demographic. 2024 saw an uptick in venture capital deployment into defense technology startups. And I think this is different and distinct from the so-called dual-use investing that we saw feature in a lot of the defense technology venture capital kind of analyses, where SpaceX took actually the preponderance of so-called dual-use or defense technology venture capital. Great company, obviously, but not necessarily representative of what a lot of other folks are doing in kind of the pure play defense technology world. So there was an 11% year-on-year uptick in defense technology venture capital deployment from 23 to 24. There were $3 billion worth of venture deals in 2024. A bunch of the companies kind of represented, I think, in 2024, big fundraising rounds were, outfits like Helsing and Anduril and Mach Industries and a few others. But I view this as generally good in the sense that companies like ours doing innovative things at some level depend on the venture capital and risk capital ecosystem continuing to vote that this is a growth market and a place where, real businesses can be built. But that being said, I think it's still an unproven industry for venture capital in that we haven't seen a lot of big exits from the last 6, 7, 8 years of intensive and intensifying venture capital deployment.
So
Simon,
I have a bone to pick with that.
Okay. Yeah.
So we for at least the last 2 or 3 years, you've heard this growing drumbeat of there need to be big exits, there needs to be action, otherwise VC is going to dry up. Yet it keeps growing, and nothing major contract wise happened in 23-24 for innovative startups happened to really re-incentivize in some sort of special way. If anything, I would say that the new admin has a much better sort of message and signal to the startup and VC community. So I don't see any reason why it would slow down now versus the 23 to 24 years. It just feels like a very thin refrain now to be like, hey, you really need to be demonstrating. Well, you're pumping in more and more money without this demonstration that you're asking for. So what is the signal that you're getting that's making you continue to crank it up?
Yeah, so I mean that's a great point, especially because, and I have complained many times in this forum that many of the big contract awards to the so-called innovation economy are actually going to legacy prime contractors rather than upstarts.
Totally.
So what I think is happening is that the venture ecosystem is voting with optimism that it's coming, right? That it's going to happen. Sure. I actually don't know that exits. I used to say that exits are the milestone or the indicator, the trailing indicator of having, good, positive, productive energy and resource deployment in the venture capital industry in years preceding a wave of exits. That being said, Palantir is probably the big kind of marquee company to point to that is a success in, if not the pure play defense technology realm, certainly defense and software, but it's, pushing 20 years and it took a long time to go public, and public is, going public or an initial public offering is one of the so-called exit off ramps that generate liquidity and return to investors. I think that actually doesn't say anything. It says that either it's a long, slow road to exit, but it could be highly valuable, right? Palantir recently passed in market cap Lockheed Martin as an example, big and growing, right? But so exits are a bellwether indicator, but we haven't seen any. That is one way that you would see value being returned and venture being productive. But I think that the much more interesting metric is what you're pointing to, Simon. It's major contract awards. They have to go.
I'm super optimistic, and I think that even there's almost like this middle tier of contracts where folks are starting to show real success. And I think there's for sure a growing sentiment that DoD is slowly but surely figuring out how to connect this end user demand innovative company pipeline together in a meaningful contract way. Yep. Is it going to turn into $1 billion contracts overnight? No, of course not. But I also don't think that exits are going to look the same as they have traditionally. I think Palantir is a perfect example. Defense is different. Defense will never be the same as straight commercial technology. It's just not. And I think Palantir is an example of sort of a renaissance happening in defense in the same way that the Google, Apple, Facebook, Meta renaissance happened in commercial tech. I think Palantir is the first wave of these folks that are going to look like that, specific to the defense space. But there's, we do a new report on acquisition reform every year, it seems like. But if you ever go back and read ye old Packard report, right, the co-founder of Hewlett Packard did a big acquisition reform report in the 80s, and he spoke about all of these topics and the speed of acquisitions and why they should buy more commercial technology many, many years ago. This is exactly the kind of thing he talked about. It's not the same. It will never be the same. He'd been in DoD. He'd been at Hewlett Packard. But there is money to be made there. You just have to think about it a little bit differently.
Well, I mean, the question for venture capitalists is venture right for DoD and defense technology? In other words, does it generate venture level returns? There's a long legacy of private equity being involved with defense or government technologies, which serves as kind of a consolidation, efficiency driving, liquidity kind of off ramp in many ways. But that has predominantly played in like the services, hardware, elements of the business. So venture is making the bet that there will be venture-like returns. In other words, you'll have 6% of their investments will return 60% of the fund with 100,000x returns for a minority of their investments. And it's inherently much more risky, and it might not be a good fit for defense. And I don't,
My guess at this stage is that it's slower and requires a little bit more patience.
Totally. And these are the reasons why it's not always appropriate, because venture life cycle, the fund life cycle traditionally is 10 years. And if you cannot return capital in 10 years, you need to do something to, deliver liquidity to investors who need liquidity or returns. And that looks like secondary offerings and all sorts of other kind of mechanisms. But I think the jury's still out. Venture might not be right for defense. There's certainly some massive bets going on right now with the tailwind of a new administration that's heavy and tight with, the tech venture senior kind of thought leadership strata of the tech world. We'll see if that lasts.
I think that the last point I would leave is that it at this stage looks like it has the potential to be very counter-cyclical.
Sure.
So I think even though it probably ends up being a slower, more patient type of venture capital needed, I also think it could be de-risking for other traditional venture capital, because as we're seeing right now, you're going to see decreases in federal spending everywhere, really, except for defense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it either venture will remain engaged if we see big contract awards and we see like liquidity and we see exits and stuff, or venture, which is really just the riskiest end of the private equity continuum, will fade in defense, and we'll see kind of a return to creative private equity plays. Either way, risk capital will need to be deployed into this industry. And I think what they're noticing, and I'm going to use this as the pivot point to the next item, I think everybody's noticing that defense budgets don't appear to be going down, right? Like even though there were kind of blanket mandated 8% cuts across the U.S. DoD's programming, we saw news just this week that President Trump and the cabinet are intending for $1 trillion of defense spending, in the next fiscal year. Can you square that for us, Simon? In other words, like we thought it was going to be lower top line. Like, how do you get to $1 trillion while simultaneously delivering a lower top line budget?
So I think there's two real possibilities here. The first is, and this is what I'm leaning towards, but the first is the top line still comes down. I still think the top line is going to be lower, but I think reconciliation is going to add enough money back into the defense pot to get us over $1 trillion in defense spend for FY26. That's what I think is going to happen, because we're expecting $100 to $175 billion in reconciliation. So they could cut $50 billion off the top line and still clear $1 trillion for defense spending.
So we might see something like an $800 billion defense top line, and then $200 billion worth of, like, I don't know, modernization or prioritization spending in reconciliation. Is that how that works?
Yeah, I think an 850-150 split makes a lot of sense. So that's like the first possibility. The second one is that the Trump admin maybe is deciding that they're going to invest really heavily in some of these marquee programs like shipbuilding. Nuclear modernization is a big one, I know. We talk about $1 trillion defense budget, but there's a significant portion of that defense spending that goes to the Department of Energy for things like plutonium enrichment
Sure.
and mining and all that pit production, all that stuff. So even though a $1 trillion defense budget is super interesting, I'm not sure that it actually resonates directly onto what we do and what our community does.
Well, Dave, so it seems like one of the ways to be successful as an innovator, whether you're a legacy and an incumbent trying to innovate or you're an upstart company like ours, is to understand over the multi-year period what those modernization priorities are, and then align yourself with those and try to generate value that is aligned with those, modernization efforts. What are those appearing to be? So we saw Secretary Hegseth's 17 protected categories. Is it aligned with those? Is it something different? How should we understand that modernization prioritization matrix?
Yeah, so always it's sort of like tracing the funding, right? Like there's the really big hot topic modernization priorities, either from the Army plan or the individual services plan or the National Defense Strategy, and there's this hot topic, really big modernization priorities, but those flow down for action into the component of those systems, the components of those systems, or who's responsible for actually servicing that system as a whole. And then that's backed with funding. And so where is all of that going? Because there are probably 5 or 6 different major organizations that are trying to figure out one-way attack UAS systems right now. And so there's internal politics, and there's who's actually going to get the rose pinned on them for solving this problem for the joint force or for their specific service, or who's taking the lead among the services. Like, the interesting question to me is not always what's on the list, because that's usually pretty publicly available. It's like where the actual acquisitions arm is that's going to be solving this problem, and how are they most likely going to distribute the tasks of initial capability. What is it supposed to do? What requirement am I fulfilling? What warfighter, what specific problem am I facing? And what do I know about the current technologies in the industry posturing?
To that end, I think the COCOMs again are going to be a big winner in this round of stuff. Both in the top line and in reconciliation. Like we're already seeing the way Northcom is collaborating with DHS and money that's flowing to that joint task force. And I think the top line reconciliation are both going to pour more gasoline on that fire. To Dave's point, if the COCOMs are doing this acquisition effort as opposed to the Title 10 entities, and you're making one-way UAS, but you're laser focused on just a Title 10 component acquiring authority, there's a ton of money that's going to flow to the COCOMs that you might not be able to get access to.
So maybe very specifically, what are the nuclear modernization? Doesn't sound like a thing that's going to be tackled by, a young upstart, right? Like our company, just that's not one of those things, right? But autonomous shipbuilding, right? This is why the venture industry has made such a big bet on companies like a company like Saronic, because they're promising the future of not just autonomous surface vessels and autonomy software and everything else, but the shipyards and shipbuilding facility and capability that it's itself. I honestly wouldn't have expected a couple of years ago that an upstart, a Silicon Valley startup, I realize they're not out of Silicon Valley pure, but would have been contending for and perhaps even being considered for giant contract awards in this kind of shipbuilding shipyard category, but that appears to be the case. So maybe there are elements of modernization priorities that are up for contest from the true kind of young upstart community. Maybe not. What else is out there?
Yeah, so off the top of the list, you've got things like long range precision fires, next generation combat vehicles. You've got your autonomous autonomous combat or collaborative combat aircraft, network command and control, complete overhaul, air and missile defense. Like there's all these top modernization priorities, but if you drill down to any of them, take the top one, for example, like long range precision fires. We've been talking about this for 5 years, but it looks like it's really getting some juice behind it. We need to be able to sense and strike something a really long ways away very accurately. That is immediately obvious to everybody involved. But if you look at long range precision fires, there's not a single entity that an organization like ours can go to and say, I can solve your entire long range precision fires problem. It's just a system of systems. Like somebody has to do the sensor, somebody has to do the payload, somebody has to do the delivery vehicle, somebody has to network it in. So if you look at the government customer disposition of something like long range precision fires, you're going to get Army Futures, like who's driving the bus? You're going to get Army Futures Command doing things and publishing guidance. You're going to get PEO missiles in space, probably vying for buying or acquiring the thing. You're going to get U.S. Army Research Development Engineering Command. You're going to get the S&T community that's probably already testing things and like validating portions of the requirements. You're going to get the Fire Center of Excellence, who's responsible for making all of these systems work together, from sensor to shooter. You're going to get folks and entities like RICTO, or the rapid fielding sort of folks that are buying the best possible solution they can and putting it in the field in low quantity and testing it out to inform the other 4 or 5. So from our position, you sort of have to engage with every single office in that community if you have a piece of this problem to solve.
I'll be honest, this just sounds like same old thing. That just sounds like the same old kind of dance that you do when you're trying to generate the network and community of support around an innovation project, either led by and initiated by government or led by and initiated by a private sector player like ours. I mean, that just sounds like the same thing that we've been doing in the trenches for 6-7 years now.
I think my point is, I think that Simon's right. I think that the only lightning bolt across all of those organizations is a combatant commander.
Sure.
Saying, no, seriously, I understand force modernization. I went to all the schools that taught me how force modernization works. I'm aware of a system that works, and I want it right now.
Yeah.
Or yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the most interesting sort of government reform thing I think happening in this Title 10 man, train, and equip space is that's not really going to work for the COCOMs. COCOMs need stuff faster based off of real world urgent needs, and they're also going to move on from those needs much faster than you would ever see in this traditional Title 10 system. So I think that's going to be a real paradigm shift as we continue to empower and resource the COCOMs.
What's the process from here? $1 trillion budget, maybe it matters, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it trickles all the way down into innovation pots of money into the COCOMs where they can spend on innovative technologies. Maybe it gets down into the PEOs or into the labs. Like what's the process from here? How should we track and understand whether this is a meaningful impact or not? Like President's budget comes out, PPP is happening. This is going to impact, fiscal year 26, obviously. So it's many months away, but also not. It's right around the corner in government, time. So what's the process?
I mean, PB is the first, right? And we're expecting President's budget request sometime in May. And that'll give us our first sort of big blush. The Congress usually doesn't deviate really sharply from the president's budget request, which is to say that there's billions of dollars in difference, but there is not hundreds of billions of dollars in difference typically from what the admin's requesting. So I think that'll be our first indicator, because to your point, you could be dumping all of it into military construction to improve the quality of life that has long been neglected, right? You could build a couple dozen barracks and burn through an extra $50 billion pretty quick. So PBR, I think,
sounds
shows
like some
us
nice
that,
barracks. That sounds like better than the barracks I lived in. I don't know.
You should see some of the barracks that they're building right now. I saw a tour of the new Air Force barracks the other day, and I was like, man, that's extraordinary.
I slept for many, many weeks in the sweatiest Quonset hut ever, in the schoolhouse.
I lived in a place that was colloquially referred to as Felony Creek. So shout out to anybody that was in French Creek on Camp Lejeune, which we affectionately remember as.
Did you have
Felony
to when you weren't sweating your ass off in that in Felony Creek? Were you also shepherding up pine cones like Dave did once upon a time in Southern Pines?
No, we did. Felony Creek was not kept nice because in Felony Creek you could come out to your car on cinder blocks, so it just didn't seem like worth putting lipstick on the pig and making it pretty when it was full of crime.
Is it still there?
On-base crime. It was other Marines stealing from each other. It was
totally.
terrible.
Yeah. I won't name names, but I know plenty of OG Marines who were given the option, like go to prison, go to jail, or go to the Marine Corps. And it's not
Tales all the time.
It's not like those habits and lifestyle choices just stopped once you stepped on the yellow footprints.
So here's the hard part. I agree with Simon that the lightning bolt to cut through a lot of this bureaucracy is a geographic combatant commander saying, I need something and I need it yesterday. And it seems like the administration and current policies are trending in that direction. The problem is their tool for doing that right now is a joint urgent operational needs statement or an emergent operational needs statement or something like that, which means that for any given capability, you have to get it on the top list of the staff of that geographic combatant command, right? Like you can't solve a problem that is a problem for every warfighter. You have to solve a problem that escalates to the level of very senior echelons of the command. So my assumption is what we'll start seeing lower echelon requests for specific problems, still driven by the geographic combatant command, but not it has to be one of my top 3 priorities in Indo-PACOM to move the needle. You'll get a smaller sort of requirements or initial capabilities development structure built out to where the commander in Japan, as opposed to the commander of all of Indo-PACOM, has the ability to do something like an ONS or a JUONS, build or buy me anything.
Yeah. And not just given the authorities, but budget and everything else that comes with it to actually execute that contracting activity, which doesn't currently live there and might in future years. So I think the bet, and this is one of those recommendation items that we've, I think, ended up honing in on over the past many weeks of analysis and many more months of years of experience and thought, is that companies who want to be relevant in the real world probably need to start building sales and engagement capacity and capability well beyond the beltway, and actually get out and engage the combatant commanders and their teams.
The the JRAC, the Joint Requirements Oversight, or the JROC, Joint Requirements Oversight Council, and the JRAC, the acquisitions capability there in the Beltway, the Joint Rapid Acquisition Cell. I think they can only take so many meetings in a day.
That's right.
So you have to rack up some air miles.
Yeah, no kidding. Some cool places we get out to. So Doge continues, apparently unabated. From our network, we keep hearing about gov contractors actively developing off-ramps and alternatives because, there's a lot of concern about what happens to the federal workforce in a variety of different agencies. One that has, I think, risen to the fore that is of interest for all of us in this industry is DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research, whatever
Projects
it is, agency. Projects Agency. Longtime kind of mainstay lab that does a lot of innovation stuff. Obviously, lower technology readiness level, TRL. Kind of from very early stage, as I understand it, to kind of middle prototype stage, but doesn't actually transition, or at least hasn't developed a strong track record of transition. It appears that they are, perhaps through the Doge apparatus, perhaps through other means, they're being reoriented on relevance and engagement with the innovation economy. I don't know what this actually means, but it sounds like they're trying to kind of develop some front doors in the same way as perhaps a DIU or other kind of innovation front doors are trying to do. Dave, you've got far more experience on the DARPA topic than Simon and I have, I believe, certainly more than I have. Any thoughts or commentary on how DARPA is a relevant front door or a potential partner for young companies that need to move quickly and don't have 7 to 50 years to do slow burn R&D projects?
It's not. Everything else I say will be contentious, but it is not a front door for a company like ours at all.
Okay, good.
I am going to defend them and their mission, and that it shouldn't change, and their existence overall, but also suggest that is move on. Keep moving.
We'll tell Elon, don't fire anybody. Don't recommend firing anybody.
Well, so I'm gonna defend them because it's what's best. I believe it's what's best for the U.S. and I might have kids in the military in 20 years, but it's a terrible place for companies like ours. So yeah, I think the misunderstanding here is DARPA's charter is they invest in incredibly high risk but incredibly high payoff technologies development. It's not innovation. It's flat out invention. And the reason why it should exist is because it wouldn't make sense for private industry to invest IRAD dollars in these sort of really risky problems, or our investors, because as you stated, like the timelines are so long, the risks are too high, the commercial return is too uncertain. Like nobody else is going to invest money in those really hard big, hairy problems. But if they work, they can fundamentally change the game, right? That's how we get ARPANET, internet. That's how we get stealth. And sure, it was 20 years flash to bang. I still want that investment in that research to happen so that we can benefit from it in a decade or two. It's just not appropriate for companies like ours or for private investment. They're acting before there's a market, before there's any certainty, before anyone else sometimes even believes that what they're attempting to do is possible. And they have a lot of autonomy to do that. They're designed sort of in this space between like military necessity and sort of like scientific ambitious big hairy problems. So they're good at solving those problems, but they're terrible at transitioning those capabilities to the field. And they make I really don't think they make any claims about transitioning those technologies to the field. They basically say, when we tried to solve this really big, hairy problem, this is what we learned about low Earth orbit satellites, or this is what we learned about invisible headlights sensing without increasing your detectable signature. Here's this entire body of work science that now that it's a slightly higher TRL level, academia, national labs, the S&T community can then take and build upon that and then go to a vendor for a potential solution. So I see a lot of their, like the intellectual property that was developed under DARPA programs transition in some way, shape, or form by a vendor many years later, but not a good place for defense tech startup to go and knock on the door.
As you're talking, I'm on like the DARPA programs website, and all the language on this website might fool a, relatively I'm going to say naive or less educated defense technology executive, a founder or a startup entrepreneur or whatever. Going onto this website might fool you that they actually do want to do innovative, fieldable stuff. Like I'm just seeing anesthetics for battlefield care as, a major program category. And that seems like one of those things where, like, if you develop an anesthetic for battlefield care, why wouldn't it not be adopted into the battlefield care regime like next week if you have the thing, right? So like, I'm not saying that they're doing anything unethical here, DARPA, but they are using all of that kind of like innovation, speed of innovation kind of language, and that.
I'll boil this down even further. I'm looking at a DARPA announcement for an event coming up in Chicago soon, and the last bullet in there, why you should go to this, is accelerating transition from bench to battlefield.
That's right.
And I don't think necessarily that DARPA is going to be able to change its DNA. And I also don't think they're trying to fool people. I think they are trying to grapple with the reality of where the new admin and where resources are going to go. We've heard from this admin that they want to reduce government spend on RDT&E. They want to see, private industry doing more of that. They have talked about collapsing, the Strategic Capabilities Office in with DIU and with CDAO. The Strategic Capabilities Office has kind of become the de facto transition arm for DARPA in a lot of ways, because DARPA stuff, to Dave's point, is too big and fundamental. And SCO often will take these big, fundamental, game-changing technologies, and usually in covert projects, turn them into battlefield technologies very quickly for one specific problem or another. So I think what you're actually seeing here with DARPA, when you're seeing this kind of language, is the same thing we saw when you heard there were 17 protected categories from the 8% cuts. You need to recolor yourself as the new cool thing. Otherwise, you're going to get whacked with cuts.
That's exactly right. I think that what you're reading is primarily marketing for survival. I know nothing about that anesthetics program.
Sure,
I can almost
marketing for survival. Yeah, that's the name.
I can
of your
almost
book, Dave.
I know nothing about that anesthetics program, Garrett, and I haven't even read what you've read on the website. But however, I can almost guarantee you that the DARPA PM that is in charge of that program is attempting to do what you see in sci-fi, where there is, one magical shot that provides anesthesia and also probably heals you to some extent.
Just spray a person down.
And they have no intention of immediately transitioning anything.
Well, so what we're saying is that some of this is potential virtue signaling or marketing for survival, which is a great phrase. I agree. Does the new administration and maybe the Doge sledgehammer kind of lurking, the whatever, all these kind of pressures and forces with this new regime, does that actually push DARPA in the direction of being better or faster in a transition phase? Or is that not even part of their mandate, and we should never think of it in that way, and this is pure marketing?
Yes,
It's just that.
If you try to turn,
I don't entirely agree.
If you try to turn DARPA into another like rapid reaction, like technology, solve a problem in the field right now, that you got the wrong mission, the wrong charter, the wrong structure, the wrong authorities, and the wrong people working there.
I disagree with that. Yeah.
Let me bring up one more example. There's a program on here called AIR, Artificial Intelligence Reinforcements. It's all about multi-ship, beyond visual range, air combat mission, autonomy. It's being developed and demonstrated on F-16 test beds, and then transferred to an unmanned combat aerial vehicle, UCAV. That sounds so much like things that are already actively being developed and fielded, either by the military or in private industry and being transitioned into the military context. Why is DARPA even spending resource and money on those categories? Why do they have program if it's already being developed and fielded at a much higher TRL elsewhere? Is this just redundancy in kind of the giant sprawl of government, or is this something else?
Again, my assumption, and DARPA's made some changes since I used to work with them for sure. And it can't all be marketing. That some of that may be true, but my assumption is within that program, even with the currently deployable technologies, there are probably components of that problem that are very, very hard science problems. And that's what DARPA is investing in, is not reinventing the capability that's already working. It's the fundamental limitation of this capability is some new science that we need to invent so that it is much better later. That's
so here's why I'm going to disagree. Not in whole cloth, but in some particulars, and there's two reasons. One, the gap between fundamental science and usable battlefield technology, I think, has shrunk dramatically from the inception time of DARPA. I think anything that you do that is developmental, foundational in nature with AI can very quickly be turned around into a usable technology. So even as you are working on these hard fundamental science problems in AI, it still has a much shorter flash to bang, and you can, with an appropriate pipeline of end users. I can also say that there are, from firsthand experience, there are projects happening at DARPA that are considered very low TRL that no normal human being would look at and think of as low TRL. They would look at it and go, that seems like it works right now, and that DARPA is in Indo-PACOM letting Marines use it. What is the difference between just making it a program or not? And that's more of a bureaucratic problem than it is a DNA problem. And I'm not saying that's all of DARPA by any means, but it's occurring. So I think there's a lot of space for DARPA if they with some truly innovative leadership and the top cover to really cut through some cultural barriers to take a great number of DARPA projects and turn them into usable battlefield tech, particularly for the COCOMs who maybe need it to solve one specific problem and aren't going to turn it into this big, long, dramatic program of record. I think DARPA gets very blinders on problems to some of Dave's points there, but I think a lot of those could be applicable to current modern day challenges. It's just not as sustainable as an M16, right?
Well, one would hope that they are continuing their legacy of developing incredibly foundational, powerful technologies. One can hope and sort of trust. But maybe from our perspective, Dave, how does a company like ours effectively engage with DARPA? Is it worth it, in other words, or is it just not worth it? But if it's worth it, then how do you do that? How do you go about doing that in a resource constrained kind of early stage project?
I don't believe that it's worth it for. I don't believe that it's worth it for us, and not because, again, I hold the organization in high regard. I don't think it's worth it for us just because the time it's going to take for us to get a capability to the field. I think that it's more. I think the way that we would engage with DARPA is if we are trying to solve a customer problem, iterate, innovate on a customer problem, and there is some science that is coming from DARPA, from the academic institution, from a project that they run. They did some interesting work in subterranean environment, right? We may run into a problem where we're attempting to map subterranean or similar and find that they already addressed some critical piece of that, and then license the intellectual property or collaborate with the entity that solved that problem for them. I think the only way.
Yeah, all of that makes sense to me. I was flicking through another set of these program lists. I didn't see any projects oriented at making painting rocks and picking up pine cones any easier. Is that...
DARPA's focused on the wrong NGAD is what they're focused on, unfortunately.
All I want from that organization, I want them to not get the pressure to become yet another we'll get stuff in the field real fast organization. And I want them to go back to being very quiet and working on the next internet. Because that's been really powerful for U.S. dominance.
I completely agree with that. However, caveat, you look at something like NGAD, right? Next Generation Air Dominance, 6th Generation Fighter. DARPA was intimately involved with every step of creating the technologies that are components of the Next Generation Air Dominance Fighter, right? And I think companies like ours do have value to the nation in interacting with DARPA because they are creating very interesting technologies very fast. And I want DARPA to be aware of them when DARPA is trying to stitch together things like a 6th Generation Fighter. Because we do know of venture-backed startup companies that are building stealth fighters and, hypersonic motors and rockets and all of these things. So I agree with Dave in the context of this is not the place that you go to transition your stuff quickly to a program of record and create this really sustainable pipeline. However, we know companies that are doing very interesting foundational stuff like hypersonics and nuclear energy, and they should be interacting with DARPA so that they can be a part of these conversations.
It does seem to me that it probably depends on the company, the technology that you're building, the patience or lack of patience in your capital stack, and a whole range of other things. Also, it seems that, for a company that is maturing and we're 6 or 7 years old, there's probably a time where we start investing in longer term, slower burn, but very valuable, high importance projects. And so there's probably an inflection point there, but my sense right now is that for truly early stage, move fast, software centric startups, DARPA is not the right place, and it might serve just as an element of noise when you're in search of signal. So that's a bit of my bottom line. Dave, why don't you grab last word and then we'll wrap.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think that's right, and like not all startups are the same. If you just walked out of academia and you're the PhD that has patents in nanobot technology, and you have some like game-changing ability to go, okay, this is how we're going to heal a soldier with nanobots. Or I'm just making this up, obviously.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
That's a great.
You've been reading Ray Kurzweil. The singularity is nil. Keep going.
Yeah, that's a great place to go. That's a great place to go and partner and sell your wares. Not for, I think largely not for VC back, not for folks that have products or innovating or iterating on products.
That sounds right to me. Simon, any saved rounds? You got anything before we wrap?
No, I think I said my last piece on DARPA there. I think it's a valuable place. I also would just argue always, yes, your company needs to survive, but we're working on a bigger thing here. All of us.
We who?
Americans
are working on a bigger
contribute
thing
your technology to DARPA. Go interact with them, meet some people. Don't do just what your cap table demands of you. Participate in the national security conversation wherever you find water.
Well, that may or may not be the company line, but
I'm not the businessman at the table. Sorry about loving my country. Apologize.
I think you can love your country and also participate in the free market that drives real innovation. But anyway, allegedly that's the case. Okay, so while we wrap here, wanted to let everybody know we're going to be at Apex in late April in National Harbor, Maryland. We'll have some participation on the agenda, but we're also going to be spinning up a live game day. If not live, then at least at a game day set of podcast recordings for folks in and around that event, perhaps in partnership with other podcast platforms, and look forward to seeing people there. This is the Goat Rodeo. This is where we talk about defense technology at the intersection of venture capital, national security, upstart antics, and everything else. And we are looking forward to seeing you next time. See ya.